So we concluded this section on buildings and cities with lots of nice ideas. Now we move on to land use. Of course, we have already touched on this a little bit when we did food section, where we touched on various aspects of land use as well, especially agriculture, food production, nutrient management, composting, landfill, methane recovery, and so on and so forth. We have separate set of issues to be looked at here for drawdown. This is a nice image of a Kermode bear known as the spirit bear by the Tsimshian people of the Great Bear Rainforest, a 250-mile coastal temperate rainforest in British Columbia, one of the most beautiful places in the world. Kermode bear is rarely seen, but more easily spotted during the salmon season when they feast near streams and falls, as you see in this photograph. So that region from Canada into Alaska down into Washington, Oregon, there are many rivers where salmon swim upstream for laying eggs and then dying. That's their life. They are born in the freshwater rivers, swim out to the ocean, and then come back when they want to breed. So the bears obviously have evolved to feast on the salmon during that salmon run seasons. The forest is largely intact today due to the Great Bear Rainforest Campaign, one of the most successful campaigns ever undertaken to stop clear-cutting and logging. Beginning in 1984, the Clayoquot Sound, First Nations peoples and environmental NGOs set up blockades to protest logging rights that had been granted to Macmillan Bloedel, the logging company. After 22 years of unrelenting work by campaigners, BC Premier Christy Clark announced in February 2016 that an agreement between First Nations, timber companies and environmental organizations would protect 85% of the 15.8 million acres. So obviously the business interests had to be given something, a fraction, 15% of the land for clearing. This is the modus operandi across the world. Indigenous people have to fight for it, NGOs, government policies, international pressure, international agreements under Paris Agreement, UNFCCC, and so on. They all have to come together to drive forest protection, the first item on our list under land use, which is ranked by 2050 at number 38. It has 6.2 gigatons of reduced CO2 by then, but it also has 896.29 gigatons of CO2 protected as above ground and below ground mass. So when we deforest, we not only lose the above ground mass, but the much unknown part remains, the loss of soil carbon and so on. Global cost and savings data are too variable here to be determined, so we will leave it. And this business of NGOs or other individuals getting involved with the indigenous communities and other NGOs and environmental interest groups to protect is not a very safe business. This is André de Rosier. How is my French pronunciation? A French Catholic priest who doubles as a human rights lawyer has emerged in Brazil as the next likely target to big landowners bent on turning parts of the rainforest into grazing land for cattle. The price for killing him is estimated at around $38,000. That's not a small amount in those areas. So you can imagine how vested interests are able to go to far lengths to get rid of the opposition to their agenda. Let's look at a few data points from our world and other sources. The main thing will turn out that protecting the forests is not an easy task, or even assuming that forests are always a net sink of carbon is also not always solid unless they are protected from perturbations or disturbances, as we will see. So above ground biomass in forests per hectare in 2015. So here it's measured in tons of forest biomass per hectare. We can also look at emissions or net source sinks and so on. And here are the numbers going from 60 tons per hectare all the way to greater than 300 tons per hectare. So obviously Amazon area shows up, rainforests of Central America show up, Pakistan shows up here, significant number. I suspect data is not available for India, Nepal, Bangladesh and Southeast Asian countries and so on show up, as well as Russia and these Eastern European and Asian countries. Okay, the services by forests, of course, food, fiber, medicine, wildlife habitats, aesthetic value, ecosystem services in general, in terms of sequestering carbon, microclimate, indigenous people making a living on them, and so on, are vast. More specifically here, 86 million forests, the forests provide more than 86 million green jobs and support the livelihoods of many more. Okay, that's a conservative estimate. An estimated 880 million people spend part of their time collecting fuel wood and producing charcoal. That's a forest-dependent livelihood as well. Of the people living in extreme poverty, over 90% are dependent on forests for at least part of their livelihoods. So this is obviously critically important for poor people in the global south, and we will see that deforestation is the biggest problem for tropical forests as well. If we go back in time all the way to the last ice age, 12,000 years ago or so, the world has lost 1/3 of its forests since then. As agriculture became a way of life, human beings began to settle down and grow in population. When they went away from hunter-gatherer to agricultural pastoralists' livelihoods, settlements grew that increased the fertility rates, family care, child care, etc., and population began to grow as well. And agriculture still remains the largest threat to forest lands. So here 29% of the land, 14.9 billion hectares, and 71% ocean. That's the surface area. If we look at habitable land 10,000 years before present, 71% was habitable land with 10.6 billion hectares, and 19% was barren land at 2.8 billion hectares, and 10% was still covered with glaciers, which have been slowly degrading, melting, 1.5 billion hectares. 1.4 billion hectares of which is in the land area of Antarctica. The continent is basically entirely covered with deep glaciers, and so on. So here you have 57% forest area, 42% wild grassland and shrub. By 5,000 years we were down to 55% and 44% wildland, grassland, shrubs respectively. And as you go from 1700 to 1800, 1900, 1950, 2000 and 2018, when this report was prepared, you can see the amount of forest land dropped from 52% now down to 38%. And there may be some good news, maybe that the deforestation has peaked, but we'll also see that 2020 was quite a bad year for deforestation of the Amazon. So just for comparison, 1 billion hectares is equal to an area the size of the USA. The expansion of agriculture led to replacement of forests as well as wildlands by 1800. So you can see the other things changing. Grazing has increased, and wild grassland and shrublands have decreased, and croplands have obviously increased as well. Global distribution of forests showing 10 countries with the largest forest area in 2020, million hectares and percent of the world forest. You can see where they are. So Russian Federation here, Brazil is down here, and this is rest of the world. India down here, Australia, where is US? United States is this color here, the orange color. So you get the idea. Nearly all of global deforestation occurs in the tropics. So we are looking here at global, going to urbanization and commodity-driven deforestation. So clearance to grow crops, produce meat and mining, and 3/4 driven by agriculture. So that's the biggest threat still. Tropical regions account for 95% of the deforestation. Temperate regions account for the remaining 5%. Here it is in terms of million hectares. So that's not good news here. Various numbers: Latin America, Southeast Asia, Africa, North America, and so on. Okay. Obviously one has to be careful because Europe has deforested over time. It's not that it's not deforesting now, so it's somehow better than others. Plus poverty and deforestation are closely tied together as well. This is another map showing decadal losses in global forest cover over the last 3 centuries. Here is net gain and here is net loss. So temperate regions and tropical, global and tropical forests. So this is the claim that somewhere in the 1980s we already peaked in terms of the deforestation and net loss, and since then we have started gaining and reducing deforestation and forest degradation. Under Paris Agreement, many countries like India and China have committed to growing more forests to create additional carbon sinks, so that's a good news as well. And some satellite data shows that in fact the leaf area has grown, but over India most of that may be related to agriculture, whereas in China there is a significant afforestation. India is also increasing its afforestation under the nationally determined contribution to the Paris Agreement. Who is contributing to deforestation abroad? So this story is not complete. You can look at the maps of global south which are deforesting, but they're not always deforesting for themselves. The deforestation is done for consumers that are living elsewhere. So if you look at the countries in these orangish reddish colors, those are the ones that are contributing to deforestation abroad. China and India show up as well as economies grow and they consume various things. And there are countries which are net exporting the deforested products, so you can see there are negative numbers here over many countries. So we have to be careful about how deforestation is assigned or attributed to. And of course there is bad news here that Amazon now is a net a net source of carbon. It's emitting more carbon than it's absorbing because of the forest fires, other land forest disturbances. So looking at various accumulated Amazon deforestation for their summer season, southern hemisphere, you can see summer, fall season and spring. You can see that 2008 was a bad year and then it had some breathing room, but 2020 turns out to be a monstrous year for forest loss, deforestation as well, because of a combination of things. Obviously, as we said, agriculture remains a massive perturbation. Global land use for food production. These are the various numbers we have already looked at. So here is agricultural land, 77% for livestock and meat, rest for food, crops, and so on. So agriculture and urbanization together are basically accounting for it. Some good news is that per capita agricultural land has dropped for most of the countries. Population has grown, but yield per hectare has grown, and overall the amount of land needed per person has dropped. The drivers of forest loss remain deforestation, so commodity-driven deforestation and urbanization, and forest degradation, which include shifting agriculture, forestry products, logging, management of forest for timber, paper, pulp, and so on, and of course wildfires, which include natural fires, but there are some devious ways in which deliberate burning happens because of management, and there are also cases where El Nino predictions are used to set fires, saying it was caused by El Nino and so on in regions like Indonesia by developers and other vested interests. This is just a nice cartoon schematic from Monga Bay based on the article that said we have turned the Amazon into a net greenhouse gas emitter. So that study came out in PNAS, I think the Proceedings of the National Academies of Science of the US. So this just shows you how a pre-disturbance forest looks in terms of vegetation, decaying wood and litter, the sources and sinks of various greenhouse gases, animals, soil, anoxic and oxic biogeochemical cycles, and of course water bodies in the forests as well, freshwater sediments, upland forests, seasonally inundated aspects, and so on. But post-perturbation, because of fires, pastures, agriculture, storms, logging, and so on, you end up with changes such as these, which are never good news. Under the UNFCCC, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, there is a program called Reducing Emissions from Deforestation and Forest Degradation. So it has these phases which have started in 2008, various aspects of monitoring and reporting, references, safeguards, national strategies and action plans, so readiness, implementation, and payments for results. So there is monetary incentives, especially for tropical countries, to reduce deforestation and forest degradation, which is essential for global humanity as a whole. This is an example. Malaysia's tropical hardwoods have been in demand for centuries, intensively so in the last 20 years. So colonizers have taken away good timber for a long time. During that time, timber companies have not only profited from the sale of timber, they compounded their gains by installing palm oil plantations. Much of the logging was illegal, as was the appropriation of land. Effects have been devastating. Logging has degraded or destroyed the vast majority of Malaysian rainforests, and deforestation rate is faster there than in any other tropical country. Home to one of the most intelligent primates, the critically endangered orangutan, it's estimated that only 20% of Borneo's rainforests remain. This photo shows the silt-laden waters of Miri River, colored orange by runoff from upstream logging, and the herringbone tethering of small diameter trees, which indicate that forests are not being allowed to recover before being logged again. Okay. Overall, the impact would be, for each acre of forest protected, the threat of deforestation and degradation is removed. By protecting an additional 687 million hectares of forest, this solution of forest protection could avoid carbon dioxide emissions totaling 6.2 gigatons by 2050. Perhaps more importantly, this solution could bring the total protected forest area to almost 2.3 billion acres, securing an estimated protected stock of 245 gigatons of carbon, roughly equivalent to over 895 gigatons of carbon dioxide if released into the atmosphere. Financials are not projected, as they are not incurred at the landholder level. So this is a bit longish, but worth going through this as a setup for land use as a part of the drawdown. We'll look at many no regret solutions along the way.